In this lecture, we look at how to create menus and their callback functions. Most Windows systems provide a toolkit or library of functions for building user interfaces that use special types of windows called widgets. Widget sets include tools such as menus, slide bars, dials, input boxes, but toolkits tend to be platform dependent. Glut provides a few widgets including menus that are platform independent. Glut supports pop-up menus. A menu can have sub-menus. 3 steps for setting up a menu are required. Number 1, define entries for the menu. Number 2, define action for each menu item. Action carried out if an entry is selected. So this is the callback function. And number 3, attach the menu to a mouse button. Let us look at an example of setting up a simple menu. In the main or the init function, we define a menu ID returned by glut create menu, and we call it my menu. Then we add an entry to this menu. The text for the entry is clear screen, and the identifier is 1. Then we add the menu entry exit. So this is the text of the second menu entry, and this is identified by 2. Finally, we attach the menu to glut right button, which means if we right click, this menu will appear. The first selection being clear screen, and if we select clear screen, it will return 1. If we select exit, it will return 2. Now let's look at defining menu actions. Here's an example of a simple menu callback function. We call it my menu. The input to this callback function is an integer ID, the ID returned by the selection of a specific menu. If the ID is equal to 1, so we have an equal to double equal to sign, which means that if these two are the same, the action to be performed is GL clear, which will clear up the screen. If the ID returned is 2 by the menu, then we'll exit the program. Note that when each menu is created, a unique ID is returned by glut. To add a sub-menu, use glut add submenu. Glut add submenu, and then we specify the submenu name and the integer submenu ID that will be returned when this is selected. To add a submenu entry, we use glut add menu entry with the entry name and the ID that is to be returned. To attach the current menu, we use glut attach menu. So glut attach menu will attach the menu that is current. Here is a more elaborate example of adding menus with submenus. We first define a menu with a callback function light menu. We use the glut create menu command for this, and we can identify this light menu with integer identifier light menu ID. Then we add entries for this menu. The first entry is move light, that will return 11, the integer 11. Then change RGB of the light, that will return 12. Move light 2, that will return 21. Change RGB of light, that will return 22. So these are all menu entries, right, that would be associated with the light menu. Now we create another menu, and we define the camera menu name as the callback function for this menu, and we can identify this camera menu with this ID, which is the camera menu ID. Both these IDs are of type integer. Now we add these sub-menus, these two menus that we created them as menus, but now we make them sub-menus and add them to a main menu. So let us first define a main menu. We create a main menu, we call it we pass on the callback function main menu to this menu, and then we add a sub menu which is light sources, and this sub menu ID is the same as the ID of the light menu. Then we add another sub menu camera, and the camera menu ID is from here, where we define the camera menu sub menu. Finally, we attach the menu to the glut right button. Remember, always create the sub menus before the main menu. So we created the sub menu 1 first, and then we created the sub menu 2, and then we created the main menu over here, and then we attached the sub menu 1 to it, and then the sub menu 2 to it. And this is why we needed the identifiers for the sub menus, so that we can attach this to the main menu. But we haven't stored the identifier of the main menu anywhere. Here's an example of a callback function for the light menu. So we use the same name as we have specified in creating this menu, which is light menu. It takes, of course, an integer ID that would be returned when this menu is selected. And because we had multiple menus defined in this sub menu, we use the switch instead of if statement. So case 1, case 1, 2, and so on. We can define multiple operations depending upon which particular entry of this sub menu is selected. Here is the callback function for the camera menu, which again takes the integer ID as input, and depending on that integer ID, we perform certain operations which depend on what the user has selected.